The espresso machine hiccuped, spitting steam. Clara Ara barely noticed. Not until the Chanel-clad ice queen snapped, "Are you going to just stand there gawking?" Did I mention the ring? Yeah, that ring. Her dead mother's, blazing on the manicured hand of Isabella Sterling, Billionaire's fiancée, stolen years ago in a dark alley, now sparkling under the cafe's flickering fluorescent lights. The cop said, "Be glad you weren't hurt." Hurt? They took everything. A ring, yes, but also a lifeline. A promise. So yeah, she's staring. And Isabella? She has no clue. None. This quiet waitress isn't just serving coffee today. She's serving something else entirely. Revenge? Maybe. Justice? Definitely. You just wait. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. The espresso machine hiccuped, spitting steam. Clara Ara barely noticed. Not until the Chanel-clad ice queen snapped, "Are you going to just stand there gawking?" Did I mention the ring? Yeah, that ring. Her dead mother's, blazing on the manicured hand of Isabella Sterling, Billionaire's fiancée, stolen years ago in a dark alley, now sparkling under the cafe's flickering fluorescent lights. The cop said, "Be glad you weren't hurt." Hurt? They took everything. A ring, yes, but also a lifeline. A promise. So yeah, she's staring. And Isabella? She has no clue. None. This quiet waitress isn't just serving coffee today. She's serving something else entirely. Revenge? Maybe. Justice? Definitely. You just wait. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. The scent of burnt coffee swirled around her, usually a comfort. Tonight, a suffocating reminder of routine. A routine that had been violently shattered when the bell above the cafe door had chimed, announcing the arrival of a ghost. Not a spectral figure, but something far more tangible. Her mother's ring, radiating under the cafe lights like a captured star, adorning the hand of Isabella Sterling. It mocked Clara Ara's own existence, the 8-hour shifts, the paltry tips, the dreams she'd buried under a mountain of bills. 2 years. It had been 2 years since the mugging, 2 years since the blade of grief had sliced through her life, leaving her adrift. She remembered the sickening thud as she hit the grimy Brooklyn sidewalk, the frantic scrabble for her purse already ripped away. Gone. Her rent money, her keys, and the small velvet pouch containing the ring. The police had been dismissive, their words a dull echo. At least you weren't hurt. But they didn't understand. It wasn't just a ring, it was her mother's legacy, a whisper of hope in a city that chewed you up and spat you out. It was a connection to a past that felt increasingly distant. The ring itself wasn't flashy, certainly not something Isabella Sterling, draped in diamonds and designer clothes, would normally wear. It was a vintage silver piece, its band crafted with intricate filigree of intertwined leaves. A milky opal, which her mother called the Heart of Dawn, sat at its center, flanked by tiny diamond chips. The inscription inside, Amore Manet. Love remains, a promise etched between her parents decades ago. Now, staring at the ring on Isabella Sterling's hand, it felt like a cruel taunt. The bell above the door jingled again, and the blast of cold air seemed to sharpen Clara Ara's senses. 2 women, both radiating wealth and privilege, stood just inside. One, older and severe in her Chanel suit, exuded impatience. But it was Isabella Sterling who drew Clara Ara's gaze, the subject of countless magazine covers, now standing in her humble cafe. "A table for 2, away from the window," the older woman snapped, her voice like chipped ice. Clara Ara mechanically grabbed 2 menus, her rehearsed smile plastered on her face. She led them to a quiet booth in the back. Isabella shrugged off her cashmere coat, the movement effortless and confident. And then there it was again, the ring, resting on the table, catching the light. It wasn't a trick of the light, it wasn't a look-alike, it was undeniably hers. Clara Ara's breath hitched. The blood roared in her ears, drowning out the cafe's hum. It was impossible. A stolen trinket from a Brooklyn alley adorning the finger of a Manhattan socialite? It had to be a mistake. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Isabella's voice sliced through Clara Ara's shock. The question pulled Clara Ara back to reality. But as she scanned from the ring, now under the cold light, back to the woman, she knew this was no mistake. And the ghost was very real. "The menu," Isabella prompted, a flicker of annoyance crossing her perfect features. Clara Ara's fingers fumbled. The menu slipped from her grasp, scattering across the floor. The world tilted. She couldn't breathe. Amor Manet. Love remains. Only it hadn't remained with her. It had been ripped away, stolen, and now it was here, a casual accessory on a woman who had everything. For a long moment, Clara Ara remained frozen, her gaze her apartment. The Cipriani ballroom was even more breathtaking in person, a universe of glittering chandeliers, champagne flutes, and couture gowns. The air hummed with power and privilege. Clara Ara felt like an alien on a foreign planet. She stuck close to Leo, her eyes scanning the crowd, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. For the first hour, she did her job, handing Leo lenses and memory cards as he snapped photos of socialites and politicians. Her stomach was in knots. Every time a security guard glanced her way, she expected to be exposed to be dragged out and thrown onto the street. And then she saw them. Isabella and Julian were holding court in the center of the room, the gravitational center of the party. Isabella was a vision in a shimmering silver gown, laughing at something a senator was saying. Julian stood beside her, his hand possessively on the small of her back, a confident smile fixed on his face. And on Isabella's hand, the Heart of Dawn ring flashed under the chandelier light, a beacon of stolen memory. Clara Ara knew she had to make her move. Leo was busy distracted by a famous actress. This was her only chance. Taking a deep breath, she detached herself from the periphery and began to weave her way through the glittering crowd. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her simple dress, her non-designer shoes. She ignored them, her focus narrowed to one person. Isabella had broken away from the group and was heading toward the ladies' lounge. Clara Ara's heart pounded. It was now or never. She quickened her pace, intercepting Isabella near a secluded alcove draped with velvet curtains. "Miss Sterling." Isabella turned her polite socialite smile in place. When she saw it was Clara Ara, the smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief and fury. "You," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How did you get in here?" "I'm calling security. Please just give me 60 seconds. Clara Ara pleaded, holding up her hands. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here to show you this." She quickly pulled the folded appraisal from her clutch and held it out. "This is the official appraisal of my mother's ring. Please just look at it. It describes the unique flaw in the engraving. The floor that I know is on the inside of the ring you're wearing." Isabella stared at the paper as if it were a snake. For a moment she seemed frozen. Her eyes darted from the paper to Clara Ara's face, then down to the ring on her own finger. The seed of doubt that Clara Ara had seen in the cafe was there again, a tiny crack in her perfect gilded facade. She reached for the paper, but before her fingers could touch it, a shadow fell over them. "Is everything all right, my love?" Julian Croft's voice was smooth as silk, but his eyes were chips of ice. He had appeared out of nowhere, silent and menacing. He placed himself between the two women, a human wall. "Julian," Isabella said, her voice a little shaky, "it's that waitress again." I can see," he said, not taking his eyes off Clara. His gaze dropped to the paper in her hand. With a movement so quick it was a blur, he snatched it from her fingers. He didn't even glance at it. His eyes remained locked on hers, cold and merciless. "You are persistent." "I'll give you that," he said softly. The words a clear threat. "But you're also incredibly foolish." He slowly, deliberately began to tear the appraisal certificate into pieces, first in half, then into quarters, his strong fingers ripping through the paper with chilling finality. He let the small white squares flutter to the marble floor like dead leaves. "This is your last warning," he whispered, stepping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Forget about the ring. Forget you ever saw us. If I ever see you near my fiancé again, I will make sure you lose more than just your job. I will ruin you in ways you can't even imagine. Do you understand me?" Clara Ara was trembling, but not just with fear. A righteous fury burned through her. "You're lying," she whispered back, her voice shaking with conviction. "That ring isn't your family's. Where did you get it? A dangerous smile touched Julian's lips. Prove it, he challenged. He then turned his back on her, wrapping his arm around Isabella's shoulder. Come, darling, let's not let this pest spoil our evening. He led a visibly shaken Isabella away, leaving Clara Ara standing alone in the alcove, the ruined pieces of her proof scattered at her feet. She had failed. She had gotten in. She had reached Isabella, but Julian had outmaneuvered her completely. He wasn't just trying to protect his fiancée from a nuisance. He was actively, viciously covering something up. As she watched them disappear back into the crowd, she saw Isabella look back over her shoulder one last time. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a confusion and fear that mirrored Clara Ara's own. And in that moment, Clara Ara realized the truth. Isabella wasn't her enemy. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, and Julian Croft held the key. The fight for her mother's ring was no longer just about the past. It was about to decide Isabella's future, too. The drive back to the Sterling penthouse was a silent, tension-filled affair. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of the Maybach, but Isabella saw none of it. Julian's words from the gala echoed in her mind. I will ruin you in ways you can't even imagine. It wasn't the protective anger of a man defending his fiancée's honor. It was the cold, calculated threat of a man silencing a witness. Isabella Sterling had been raised in a world where problems were handled discreetly by lawyers and publicists. They were smoothed over, spun, and made to disappear. They were not met with raw, visceral threats whispered in the aloves of charity galas. Julian sat beside her, one hand resting on her knee, the picture of calm affection, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. Don't think about it, Bella, he said, his voice soothing. She's a disturbed girl, probably looking for a payout. It's handled. You tore up her paper without even reading it, Isabella said, her own voice barely a whisper. What if she was telling the truth? Julian chuckled, a low condescending sound. Telling the truth, darling? She's a waitress who thinks a piece of jewelry in her possession is somehow connected to you. It's a classic grift. The world is full of people like her trying to leech off of people like us. You have to be firm. People like us. The phrase made Isabella flinch. Was that who she was? Someone so insulated by wealth that a genuine cry for help sounded like a grift. The waitress Clara hadn't looked like a grifter. She had looked terrified and desperate, and her eyes held a conviction that had shaken Isabella to her core. You told me the ring was your great-grandmother's, she said, testing him. You said she wore it on her wedding day in England. And she did, Julian replied smoothly, not missing a beat. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? But for the first time, the story sounded hollow, rehearsed. The confidence that had always drawn Isabella to him now seemed like a performance. She had fallen in love with his strength, his ambition, the way he seemed to bend the world to his will. Now she wondered what or who he had broken along the way. They arrived at the penthouse, a sprawling glass box overlooking Central Park. As soon as the door closed behind them, Julian's demeanor shifted. The charming fiancé was gone, replaced by the ruthless CEO. I've made a call, he said, loosening his tie. My security chief, a man named Marcus, will be looking into this girl. A little background check. We'll find out what her angle is. A background check. Isabella was aghast. Julian, that feels invasive. She's just a girl who lost her mother. She's a girl who infiltrated a private event to harass you. He counted his voice sharp. She's a security risk, and I will protect you whether you see the need for it or not. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a scotch. Now I have some calls to make. Let's just forget this unpleasantness. But Isabella couldn't forget. While Julian was cloistered in his study, his voice a low murmur on the phone, she found herself pacing the vast, silent living room. Her home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, albeit a beautifully furnished one. Her gaze fell to the ring on her finger, the heart of dawn. It felt different now, heavier, tainted, a more Manet. Driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand, she slipped the ring off her finger. For 2 years, she had worn it constantly. Now, holding it in her palm, she examined it under the light of a lamp. It was beautiful, undeniably. But was it his? She turned it over and over, her heart racing. And then she saw it. She had to squint, tilting it just so. The inscription was tiny, worn by time. Amore Mane. And the yes, there it was. A tiny, almost invisible horizontal line scoring the base of the letter. A slip of the engraver's tool. A gasp escaped her lips. Clara had been telling the truth. The world seemed to tilt. If she was telling the truth about the inscription, she was telling the truth about everything. This was not a Croft family heirloom. It was a stolen ring. Julian had lied to her, a deep, calculated, fundamental lie about something he had presented as a symbol of their love. What other lies had he told? Her mind raced. Julian was obsessively private about his past before he made his fortune. He'd always painted a vague picture of a tough upbringing, of pulling himself up by his bootstraps. He had no family to speak of. So where did a family heirloom from his English great-grandmother come from? Isabella was no fool. She hadn't gotten a degree from Wharton by being naive. She knew how to research, her hands trembling. She went to Julian's study. He was still on the phone in the adjoining media room. The study was his fortress, a space of dark wood, leather, and steel. He kept everything meticulously organized. She didn't know what she was looking for. A receipt, a letter. She started with his desk, carefully opening drawers, financial statements, blueprints, contracts, nothing. Then she saw his personal safe hidden behind a false panel of books. She knew the combination. It was the date he'd closed his first billion-dollar deal. He'd told her that once, proud of his own mythology. With shaking fingers, she entered the code. The heavy door clicked open. Inside were passports, bearer bonds, and several velvet jewelry boxes. Her heart pounded as she opened them. A diamond necklace, emerald earrings, a man's watch, and then at the very back, a small, plain cardboard box. It was the kind of box a jewelry store might use for a repair. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a collection of personal effects, an old wallet, a set of keys, a dog-eared photo, and a slim leather-bound journal. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Julian's. It looked older. The entries dated from 3 years ago, before she'd even met him. She opened it, her hands clammy. The entries were mostly notes about business deals, ruthless observations about competitors. But then she found a section about the Queen's redevelopment project. He wrote about the holdouts, the small business owners who were refusing to sell. He mentioned one in particular, the stubborn florist and her nosy bookkeeper friend who's encouraging her to fight. Isabella felt a chill crawl up her spine. The nosy bookkeeper, Clara's mother. She flipped a few more pages. An entry from just over 2 years ago stopped her cold. The bookkeeper problem is getting worse. She claims she found irregularities in our land acquisition filings, thinks she has leverage, threatening to go to the press. Sent a message tonight. Simple, effective. Should quiet her down for good. The bonus was a pretty little trinket. Might be useful someday. Isabella dropped the journal as if it were on fire. Sent a message tonight. The bonus was a pretty little trinket. The mugging. It wasn't random. It was Julian. He had orchestrated the attack on Clara's mother to silence her, to terrorize her. And he had taken the ring not as a random act of theft, but as a trophy. A wave of nausea washed over her. The man she was going to marry, the man she thought she loved, was a monster. He hadn't just lied about a ring. He was capable of a cruelty she could barely comprehend. She heard the click of the media room door. Julian was finishing his call. Her mind raced. She couldn't confront him. Not now. He was dangerous. He thought she was his possession, and he would do anything to keep control. She had to be smart. She carefully placed the journal back in the box, closed the safe, and spun the dial. She slipped the ring back on her finger just as he walked into the study. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyeing her suspiciously. Isabella forced the most brilliant, dazzling smile she could muster. "Perfect," she said, walking toward him and looping her arms around his neck. "Just thinking about our wedding. I can't wait to be your wife." As he kissed her, all she could feel was the cold metal of the ring pressing against her skin. It was no longer a symbol of love. It was a piece of evidence. And Isabella Sterling, prisoner in the gilded cage, now knew there was a key. It was the truth. and she would need the help of the one person Julian had wronged the most to use it. She had to find Clara. Finding Clara was easier than Isabel expected. Julian's background check was thorough and chillingly efficient. The file which his security chief Marcus had emailed him was left open on his desktop. Isabella, finding a search for a charging cable, saw it all. Clara's address in Brooklyn. Her employment history at the cafe details about her deceased mother. Julian's surveillance was a web, and he was the spider at its center. Isabella memorized the address. The next afternoon, citing a fictional appointment with a wedding dress designer, she slipped away from her security detail, something she hadn't done in years. She took a cab, not her chauffeured car, and traded her Louis Vuitton for a pair of simple flats she kept in her gym bag. Dressed in nondescript jeans and a baseball cap, she felt both invisible and terrifyingly exposed. Clara's apartment building was a walk-up in a neighborhood that felt a world away from Park Avenue. The air smelled of street food and autumn leaves. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed the 4 flights of stairs. What was she going to say? "Hello, the man I'm supposed to marry terrorized your mother and stole her ring, and I've been wearing it for 2 years. Can you help me?" She knocked on apartment 4B. The door opened a crack held by a chain. Clara's eye, wide and suspicious, peered out. When she saw who it was, she tried to slam the door shut. "Wait," Isabella said, pressing her hand against the wood. "Please, Clara, I'm alone. I believe you." The door remained shut. "Go away." Clara's muffled voice came from inside. "I have nothing to say to you." I saw the inscription. Isabella pressed on her voice, low and urgent. "The floor on the M. You were right. He lied to me. He's lied about everything." There was a long silence. Then the metallic rattle of the chain being undone. The door swung open. Clara stood there, her arms crossed her face, a mask of mistrust. She was wearing a paint-splattered t-shirt, and her eyes were red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept. "What do you want?" Clara asked, her tone flat. "To help," Isabella said simply. "And I need your help." Clara gave a bitter laugh. "My help? A week ago you threatened to have me fired. Your fiancé threatened to ruin my life. Why should I trust you? Because he's a monster, and I was a fool." Isabella admitted the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. "He didn't just lie about the ring, Clara. I think he's the reason it was stolen in the first place." She told Clara everything about the journal, the entry, about the nosy bookkeeper, the Queen's redevelopment project. The chilling phrase sent a message tonight. The bonus was a pretty little trinket. As she spoke, Clara's hard expression crumbled. The anger was replaced by a look of dawning horror and a grief so profound it seemed to steal the air from the small apartment. She sank onto a worn armchair, her face pale. "My mother," Clara whispered. "She told me she was getting close to something. She said the paperwork from Croft Development was a mess, that they were hiding shell corporations, bullying people into selling. She was going to talk to a reporter from the Times, and then she was gone. The mugging hadn't been a threat to silence her. It had been the first brutal step. Her mother's sudden death, officially a heart attack a few weeks later, was now cast in a sinister new light. Had the stress of the attack or something worse caused it? An unlikely alliance was forged in that small painted apartment, born from shared grief and a mutual enemy. They were 2 women from opposite ends of the universe, now bound together by the same lie. "His journal isn't enough," Isabella said, her mind trained in corporate strategy already working. "It's incriminating, but it's his private property. A good lawyer would call it fiction inadmissible. We need more. We need something concrete that links him to the attack." "The men who mugged me," Clara said, her eyes distant. "I never saw their faces clearly. It was dark. But one of them, he had a tattoo on his wrist. A snake eating its own tail. An orris." Isabella's blood ran cold. "Marcus," she breathed. "Julian's head of security. The man who did your background check. I saw him once in a short-sleeved shirt at Julian's Hamptons estate. He has that exact tattoo." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Julian hadn't hired random thugs. He had used his own man, his loyal fixer. Marcus was the link. "If we can prove Marcus was there that night," Clara began. "We can prove Julian gave the order," Isabella finished. Their plan was desperate and incredibly dangerous. Julian kept meticulous digital records of everything: payments, schedules, communications. He was arrogant. He probably believed he was untouchable. His servers were a digital fortress. But Isabella knew of a back door. A few months ago, in a fit of paranoia, Julian had hired a cybersecurity expert to run a penetration test on his personal server to find vulnerabilities. Isabella had seen the final report. She knew the weakness. "I can get into his system," Isabella said, "but I can only do it from his home network, from his terminal in the study. And I'll need a distraction, a big one. I'll need at least 30 minutes where he is completely occupied and away from the penthouse." The wedding was in 4 days. Their time was running out. "The rehearsal dinner," Clara Ara said suddenly. "It's the night before the wedding at the plaza." Isabella nodded. "He'll have to be there. But he's so controlling. He'll have me by his side the entire evening. Then you have to create a scene." Clara Ara said, a new hard light in her eyes. "Something he can't ignore. Something that makes him look bad in front of all those important people. You know him best." "What's his weakness?" Isabella thought for a moment. Julian's entire identity was built on power control and his public image. He couldn't stand to be seen as weak or disrespected, especially by her. "His pride," Isabella said, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. "His ego is as fragile as a Faber egg." The plan was set. At the rehearsal dinner in front of New York's high society, Isabella would stage the fight of her life, a public humiliation designed to send Julian storming back to the penthouse in a rage. While he was gone, Clara, armed with a burner phone and instructions from Isabella, would be parked a block away. Isabella would call her, feed her the login credentials and the exploit path from the cybersecurity report. Then Clara, the bookkeeper's daughter, would digitally hunt for the evidence they needed to destroy Julian Croft. A payment, a schedule, an email, anything that tied Marcus to that dark Brooklyn street 2 years ago. It was a terrifying gamble. If they were caught, Julian wouldn't just ruin them, he would bury them. The Plaza Hotel ballroom shimmered with crystal and forced smiles. On the eve of their wedding, Isabella initiated the final act. During a toast, her voice rang out clear and steady, publicly questioning Julian about the Croft family heirloom. She pressed him for details about the great-grandmother he'd invented, her words chipping away at his carefully constructed facade in front of his most powerful associates. "It's strange, Julian," she finished, her voice laced with steel. "For a man so obsessed with legacy, you seem to have none. Where did you really get this ring?" Humiliated and enraged, Julian stormed from the venue just as they'd planned. Isabella's signal sent Clara Ara, parked in the shadows, a block from his penthouse, into action. Guided by Isabella's information over a burner phone, Clara Ara's fingers flew across her keyboard, exploiting a weakness in Julian's digital fortress. Within minutes, she added a GPS log placing his security chief, Marcus, on her mother's street the night of the attack. Beside it, an expense report from the following day, a $50,000 wire transfer to a shell corporation authorized by Julian Croft. The memo read simply, "Consulting." The next morning, there was no wedding, only a reckoning. Armed with the flash drive, Clara and Isabella met with the district attorney. When police arrived with a warrant, they found Julian dressed in his tuxedo, his empire of lies collapsing around him. A week later, at the daily grind, Isabella slid a small velvet box across the table to Clara. Inside, the heart of dawn rested on a bed of Saturn. Clara slipped it on her finger. It felt like coming home. The ring, once a stolen trophy, was now a symbol of justice delivered, and a friendship forged in the fight for truth. In the end, it wasn't about the monetary value of a ring. It was about the value of memory, the price of truth, and the incredible strength found in the most unlikely of alliances. Clara didn't just get her mother's ring back, she reclaimed her mother's legacy of fighting for what's right. And Isabella, by choosing to stand with a stranger against the man she was supposed to marry, found a different kind of wealth, her own freedom and integrity. Their story is a powerful reminder that courage doesn't care about your bank account, and justice can be found even when the odds feel impossible. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? How would you have reacted if you were Isabella? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and unexpected friendship moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of truth prevailing. And make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas that you won't forget. Thank you for listening.